data centers, why communities reject them, and how they could become welcome neighbors. This video is a reflection on several recent news reports describing growing public resistance to large data centers. The first is an Associated Press article by Anthony Izagirre, titled, "New York Blocks Large Data Centers for a Year." The article reports that New York imposed a statewide pause on new hyperscale data centers while officials develop standards addressing electricity demand, water use, environmental effects, and rising utility costs. The second is a KVCR News report by Anthony Victoria, published on June 6, 2026, titled, "Coachella Council Approves Data Center Moratorium, Directs Staff to Draft Ban." It describes how residents packed council meetings and persuaded city leaders not only to impose a temporary moratorium, but also to begin preparing a permanent prohibition. The third is a Fox 13 Tampa Bay article by Joe Espy, published on June 24, 2026, titled, "Citrus County Data Center Proposal Withdrawn After Resident Backlash, Hearings Canceled." That report describes how an approximately 800-acre proposal was withdrawn after months of neighborhood opposition involving concerns about water, electricity, infrastructure, and nearby homes. These stories come from different states and different communities, but they raise the same question. Why has infrastructure supporting one of the most advanced technologies in human history become so unwanted that communities are imposing moratoriums, drafting bans, and forcing developers to withdraw? Artificial intelligence itself is widely used. Businesses use it to improve efficiency. Governments use it to process information. Students, professionals, and private citizens use it for education, research, writing, translation, planning, and many other purposes. Yet the physical infrastructure behind AI is increasingly treated not as progress, but as a threat. Artificial intelligence is widely used, but widespread use does not necessarily mean widespread enthusiasm. For many people, the rapid growth of AI has become associated with astronomical profits for a relatively small number of corporations and investors, while ordinary households continue struggling with the rising cost of food, housing, transportation, utilities, insurance, clothing, and medical care. Businesses report greater efficiency. Work that once required several employees or many hours can now be completed faster and at lower cost. But many consumers do not see those savings reflected in the prices they pay. The cost of producing a service may fall, yet the customer's bill does not. The company becomes more productive, but the worker does not necessarily receive a higher wage. The consumer does not necessarily receive a lower price. The household does not necessarily become more financially secure. As a result, many people increasingly see AI not primarily as a tool of shared progress, but as a tool that allows powerful institutions to reduce labor costs, increase profits, gather more information, and exercise greater control over individuals. The everyday experience of automation also matters. People are surrounded by robocalls, automated menus, virtual assistants, algorithmic advertising, automated billing systems, and customer service departments where reaching a real human being has become increasingly difficult. Much of this automation existed before modern generative AI. But the public does not always distinguish between older software, call center automation, predictive algorithms, and the newest AI systems. To the average consumer, they can all feel like parts of the same development. The company saves money by removing the human employee, while the customer spends more time struggling with the machine. So even when AI is not directly responsible, AI receives the blame. This creates a dangerous public perception. Advanced technology appears to be improving the efficiency of corporations while reducing the dignity, convenience, bargaining power, and economic security of the ordinary person. That perception may not describe every use of AI, but it helps explain why communities are unwilling to accept another enormous project merely because it is described as technologically important. When residents see a proposed data center, they may not imagine better medical care, improved education, or scientific discovery. They may imagine higher electricity demand, more corporate profit, fewer workers, more automation, and another public burden created for private gain. That is why the resistance cannot be dismissed as fear of progress. For many communities, the real question is, progress for whom? Yet the physical infrastructure behind AI is increasingly treated not as progress, but as a threat. The problem is not technological progress and not the economic system as a whole. The problem is that AI infrastructure is being introduced without a sufficiently visible, direct, and durable benefit to ordinary households. People are not merely rejecting the concrete building. They are questioning whether the present form of AI expansion gives ordinary communities enough direct benefit to justify the electricity demand, public concessions, and local inconvenience. The reason is that communities do not experience a data center as an intelligent assistant. They experience it as an enormous concrete building demanding electricity, land, water, tax concessions, and public infrastructure, while creating relatively few permanent jobs once construction is finished. That is the issue this video examines. And it proposes a different bargain. One that could transform a data center from an unwanted burden into a genuinely desirable neighbor. A traditional factory often transforms the surrounding community. A semiconductor plant, battery factory, hospital, or manufacturing complex may employ thousands of people. Those workers buy homes, shop locally, support restaurants, require schools and services, and create demand for suppliers. The employer becomes part of the community's economic life. A large data center is different. During construction, it may create substantial employment. But after completion, it can become a heavily automated facility containing immense computing equipment and comparatively few workers. The community may therefore see a building consuming electricity at the scale of a city without producing employment at the scale of a city. At the same time, electricity demand is growing rapidly. EPRI projects that data centers could consume between 9 and 17% of all U.S. electricity by 2030, compared with approximately 4 to 5% today. In Arizona, the data center share of statewide electricity demand could exceed 20% under EPRI's medium growth scenario. This creates understandable fear. Residents wonder whether utilities will need new power plants, substations, transmission lines, and backup systems. They worry that part of those costs will eventually appear on residential electric bills. They also hear that data center developers may seek tax incentives, even though the projects may create far fewer permanent jobs than traditional industrial developments. The public is therefore asked to accept a difficult bargain. A corporation receives land, power, infrastructure, regulatory approval, and possibly tax concessions. The community receives temporary construction work, limited permanent employment, vague promises of economic growth, and assurances that electricity rates may not increase. That is not enough. People have heard promises before. Municipal governments sign agreements. Companies make projections. Officials announce that a project will protect rates or create future benefits. Years later, circumstances change, contractors disappear, regulations are rewritten, fees are added, and the original promise becomes difficult to recognize. That is why another study, another community benefit agreement, or another statement that residential customers should not be harmed will not make data centers desirable. The benefit must be direct, universal, permanent, and visible on every household's monthly bill. My proposal is simple. A data center should be required to build enough new generation to cover its own electricity use, and then provide an equivalent amount of power, at no cost, to ordinary residential customers living within a defined area around the facility. The size of that area would be determined by electricity consumption, not by municipal borders. If the data center uses as much power as 40,000 ordinary homes, then approximately 40,000 nearby households should receive normal residential electricity without charge. The company could use solar, nuclear, natural gas, wind, geothermal power, storage, or a dependable combination of technologies. The specific energy source is secondary. The essential condition is that the data center must not arrive as a giant new customer competing with residents for existing capacity. It must bring additional dependable power with it, and it should generate more than it consumes. The excess electricity would be dedicated to residential customers, not supermarkets, warehouses, factories, shopping centers, or other commercial users. This makes the proposal more manageable. In a municipality containing substantial commercial and light industrial activity, residential consumption may represent only part of the total local electrical load. A large dedicated power project could therefore supply the data center while also covering ordinary household electricity. What should count as ordinary household use? It should include the equipment required for normal modern life. Air conditioning appropriate for the size of the home up to 4,000 square feet, a refrigerator, stove, washer, dryer, water heater, kitchen appliances, lighting, televisions, internet equipment, and several computers. In Arizona, air conditioning is not a luxury. It is essential household infrastructure. Optional high-consumption amenities could remain outside the guarantee. A swimming pool, heated spa, commercial workshop, cryptocurrency operation, or unusually large electric load could be charged separately. The principle would be, normal household life is covered. Exceptional or discretionary consumption is not. But a partial credit would not be sufficient. Utilities could raise the monthly service fee, increase the rate above the free allowance, add transmission charges, fuel adjustments, or other mandatory surcharges. The benefit could disappear while still existing on paper. Therefore, the guarantee must cover the complete ordinary residential bill. Generation, transmission, distribution, service charges, fuel adjustments, and mandatory utility fees. Every eligible residential statement should show the normal bill, the data center community credit, and a final amount due of 0. The obligation must also survive political and corporate changes. It should attach to the land, the operating permit, and every future owner of the data center. It should be backed by a trust, bond, or other funded guarantee. A city council should not be allowed to eliminate it later through a quiet renegotiation. Once such a system exists, the political relationship changes completely. Communities would no longer ask, "Why should we tolerate this power-hungry concrete box?" They would ask, "Which data center proposal offers our residents the greatest permanent electricity benefit?" Municipalities might then compete for projects instead of imposing moratoriums or bans, and tax reductions would become much easier to justify. A traditional factory may earn tax incentives by creating thousands of jobs. A data center could earn them differently, by eliminating normal residential electricity costs for tens of thousands of households. That would be a genuine public return. The mistake today is assuming that communities must accept data centers because artificial intelligence is important. Importance does not create entitlement. A technology does not automatically deserve unlimited electricity, land, water, public infrastructure, and tax concessions merely because it is advanced. A data center should become welcome by leaving the community materially better than it found it. Not through landscaping, not through charitable donations, not through promises that rates may eventually decline, but through one unmistakable monthly result. Electricity used for ordinary household life. Covered. Amount due 0. At that point, the data center would no longer be merely a consumer of the community's resources. It would become the source of one of the community's most valuable benefits. That is how an unwanted industrial project could become a welcome neighbor.